Hello and welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast, where we explore marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. In addition to our audio podcast, we also have a companion video podcast that includes extra pictures and videos from today's guests. Spaceports provide a critical infrastructure to space. They launch our eyes and our future while providing a valuable link to what lies beyond the orbit. The spaceport industry is our gateway to space. Just as the aviation industry began building at the beginning of last century, spaceports are building their infrastructure. Communication is vital between spaceports and their audiences if they are to grow to support a healthy space economy. Communication is vital between spaceports and their audience if they are to grow to support a healthy space economy. Marketing Spaceports is where we begin our space marketing podcast. Today's guest is a visionary in the spaceport industry with an impressive history in space. He is a scientist, astronautical engineer, and professor with several prominent degrees. His most notable experiences include serving as the FAA's Associate Administrator for Commercial Space and a manager of the Flight Integration Office for the Space Shuttle. He has worked on both the Shuttle Mir program and the International Space Station program. Currently, he serves as the president for Commercial Space Technologies, which was founded to encourage, facilitate, and promote commercial space activities. This person is all about space. Our guest is the voice of the spaceport industry and is the ideal way to begin this series. He dedicates his efforts into building the spaceport infrastructure. In addition, we will be talking to our guest about his latest addition to his impressive resume. Let me introduce astronaut and chairman of the Global Spaceport Alliance, Dr. George C. Nield. Welcome, Dr. Nield. Welcome, Dr. Nield.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on today.
As we go through the conversation, you have provided us with some video and some extra pictures that I'm going to have on the video edition of this episode. So look in the show notes to see where the link is. You just had the flight of a lifetime. Can you tell me about it?
Certainly. Well, this is just such an exciting time for space in general and commercial space in particular. I think it's interesting, before we get into the details, to realize that today there are actually 6 different US companies that are in the process of designing, building, testing, or flying systems that can carry people up to and back from space. You got SpaceX with a Dragon, Boeing with a Starliner, Sierra Space with their Dream Chaser, Virgin Galactic has their Spaceship Two, Blue Origin, which I flew on as the New Shepard, and Lockheed Martin with Orion, plus some companies like Worldview and Space Perspective that are developing very high altitude balloons with a similar type of experience. So my goodness, there's just so much going on. And each of those companies has got a different approach, different systems with different capabilities and characteristics. New Shepard has a very interesting design that Blue Origin has come up with. There are basically 2 components. You've got a propulsion module, which has a single BE-3 engine that is powered with liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen and develops about 110,000 pounds of thrust. And then the crew capsule, which has room for 6 different people to fly, each with a very comfortable reclined seats. And every seat is a window seat with a huge big window to appreciate the view. And the whole system is completely reusable. Another important factor is that they have built this to be completely autonomous. So there's no pilot on board, there's no pilot on the ground. They do have a very capable mission control room, monitoring all the systems and watching the displays to make sure everything's proceeding according to plan. But that type of approach may cause some people to be a little bit nervous. But the flip side of that is, if you have an autonomous system, you have minimized, if not eliminated, the opportunity for pilot error. So that was comforting, certainly to me. Because it's an autonomous system, we did not have to spend many, many months in training for the mission. So Blue Origin has set up a schedule with 3 full days of training, and we learned a little bit about the top level characteristics of the rocket and the capsule and the trajectory and the timeline and so forth. We spent a lot of time on emergency procedures, how to interpret the displays and use the radio. And then an awful lot of the time was just practicing over and over again, getting into the capsule, getting into your seat, attaching the harnesses and releasing the harnesses, both under 1G conditions, like before launch and after landing, but also when you're weightless, because it's a completely different process that you have to use to get all strapped in and so forth. So we went through that a number of different times. And one very clever thing that they had, there was a very realistic mock-up capsule in the astronaut training center that we spent a lot of time in. And they had pre-recorded all the sounds and noises during an actual flight previously, before a launch that had people on board. And so when we were doing our practice missions, they'd play that back at full volume, such that we even had to have our hearing protection in our ears, so it would be just like the actual flight. And so all of the bangs and the roars and the creaks and roar of the engine, all those kinds of sounds that might have been rather alarming if you heard them for the first time during the flight. Well, what was that? Is everything okay? But we were used to what it was going to sound like and what the whole experience was going to be like. So I think by the time we got to launch day, everybody felt very well prepared and ready to go on this adventure of a lifetime. So about 45 minutes before launch, we were driven out to the launch pad, climbed up 7 flights of stairs, checked everything out, and then climbed into the capsule. And of course, they had the regular countdown with go, no go from mission control at about 10 minutes before launch, and then the regular countdown. And then at T0, the engine was ignited. And a few seconds later, we were on our way. I've heard the liftoff described by space shuttle astronauts as feeling like a kick in the pants. This was not that way. It was pretty smooth, but a very rapid acceleration up to about 3 Gs. So you're being pushed back in your seats. And then after about a minute, pass through the maximum dynamic pressure or max Q conditions. And then after a little more than 2 minutes, main engine cut off. And then about 10 seconds later, a big bang as the capsule was separated from the booster. And at that point, we were given the go-ahead to unstrap and float around in weightlessness, do some somersaults and just enjoy the feeling. But then right after that, I and most of the other folks on the flight turned our attention to those huge big windows and what we could see. And let me tell you, with the curvature of the Earth and that thin blue line right above that, which is the atmosphere that we were above, and then the very, very black sky, it was just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. People talk about, oh, well, I've seen pictures, seen the movie. It is not the same. It is not the same. It's very emotional. And I mean, I get goosebumps and a little bit choked up just telling people about it, because it's just such an amazing sight. So we had about 3 minutes in weightlessness and then had to get back in our seats as the vehicle started coming back through the atmosphere. And as the air is pushing on the capsule, that's again pushing us back into our seats. On descent, it got up to about 5.5 Gs for a few seconds. So that's quite a bit, but not uncomfortable or painful in any way. Then the 3 small drogue parachutes come out, and then 3 large main parachutes, and a pretty smooth ride down to the ground. For those who watched on the video, some folks were concerned that, oh, it looks like you hit pretty hard because there was a lot of dust kicked up, but that's just regular old West Texas desert dust. And also, there is a system that fires some thrusters right at the last second before you touch down to slow the impact. And so it's actually just like sitting down in a chair, kind of hard, and with the comfortable seats, not a problem at all. So just about 10 minutes for the entire thing, but just such an incredible experience. The sights and the sounds and the feelings, it's something I will never forget.
Well, it was an amazing thing to watch. And it was even better for just a regular citizen that I actually knew you. And that was the exciting part. And that's what I love about space tourism, is that we know the people going up. It's not somebody that's been trained as an astronaut, though it does look like you have enough experience to warrant that. But it was amazing, and I had goosebumps for you.
Thank you.
So what is the next thing that you're going to be doing? You're just going to be telling the world just how impressive it was and how exciting?
So a lot of people have asked me, so what are you going to do now? Are you going to try to fly again and all that? And it's interesting. I would never turn down another flight. It was a fantastic experience. No second thoughts or regrets at all. But interestingly, this is something that I have thought about, dreamed about, hoped for my whole life, and spent most of my career supporting our nation's space programs and so forth. So to have this opportunity to personally have this experience at this point in my life and career, it's just an amazing thing. But I've had that experience now, and I'm happy. I loved it. It was fantastic. And so, yes, certainly want to tell people about it. It also makes me even more committed to thinking about how we can allow more and more people to have that experience. So here we are, 61 years after Yuri Gagarin was first launched into space as the first human being to leave the planet. And only as of today, 623 people have been to space. So only about 10 per year. My goodness, after the experience I just had, we have to do whatever we can to get those numbers up, because it is such an amazing experience. So we need to look at what's keeping those down. It's expensive, yes. It's risky. Okay, we need to work on that. And we've got some capacity limits. Even with all those companies working on it, we're going to need more rockets and spacecraft and spaceports and systems to allow this to become more and more common, because it's an amazing experience.
Well, and we have a lot of new different types of craft. Even above the whole space connection, we have the suborbital supersonic that are getting ready to come online. And I am so excited about space, but space needs a place to begin. And that's the gateways to space, which is one of the reasons why I'm so dedicated to the spaceport particular narrative. And you are the chairman of the Global Spaceport Alliance. So do you want to tell us what that's about?
Yes. So the Global Spaceport Alliance, or GSA, is a group of current or prospective spaceports, along with companies that provide products and services in support of those spaceports, and other interested entities like government organizations and associations and so forth. And there are like 26 member spaceports right now from 6 different countries all over the world. And the vision is to create a global network of current and proposed spaceports that can serve as focal points and technology hubs to facilitate the continuing growth of the space economy. And our mission is to provide members with the information, the advice, and the relationships that they can use to be successful in planning, funding, developing, and operating spaceports around the world.
I personally would love to see one in every state and every region, because I believe that they're not only are they the gateways to space, but they stimulate the economy around where they are, and they'll bring technology that will benefit our planet as we go to space.
I agree.
One of the very first exposures that I had to the spaceport arena was your spaceport development plan. That was one of the very first things I read. And I will have a link to that in the show notes. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the vision we have really is that spaceports are not just locations from which launches and reentries take place. They can also be that focal point and technology hub. And so there are other things that can take place at spaceports, like aerospace manufacturing, research and technology development, education and training, workforce development, and in the very near future, I believe, things like point-to-point transportation through space. And so if you look at the projections of what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future of the global space economy, it depends on who you talk to, but like Bryce Tech is estimating that right now, the global space economy is on the order of $366 billion, and only less than a quarter of that is spending by governments. And so the rest of that pie is from commercial and individual sources. But experts like UBS, a Swiss financial services firm, thinks that in 10 years, that'll grow to 800 billion or so, and 20 years up to $1 trillion. Morgan Stanley, again, more than $1 trillion by 2040. Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, 2.7 trillion by 2045. So if you look at those projections, I think an awful lot of that growth potentially could take place either at or nearby spaceports. So that's why we're so focused on this as being an important activity for the country and really for the whole world.
Well, and to give our listeners a little bit of an idea of what that type of money means, last year, the gross national product for the country of Australia was 1.3 trillion. So we're talking about an industry that's worth more than Australia's gross national product. And that is the conservative estimates, the things that will happen as a result of some of these technologies come out. We can't even foresee what kind of impact that they're going to have. For example, like the smartphone in 2007, if you would have said this is how we're going to run our business using these phones and the whole mobile trend, we would not have even seen it coming. So there's going to be a lot we don't see coming. Are there anything that you think may impact that we may not be aware of?
So I guess I'd flip that question around. I think that in the future, the activities at or near spaceports can have impact on other industries and other groups and so forth. So there's a huge potential for partnerships in doing all this. So, I mean, with that as a background of what's going on right now and what we think the future will look like, the report that you mentioned that we developed called the National Spaceport Network Development Plan was sort of a combination of lots of ideas talking about the idea of having a national spaceport policy. You know, do we need, are spaceports good, or do we have enough already? What can the benefits be? What are some options for providing infrastructure funding? Something we do for every other mode of transportation, but for some reason not for space-related activities. And then ideas for programmatic initiatives, things like human spaceflight training. We've talked all about the orbital and suborbital launches, but there's also a separate segment of the industry focusing on things like parabolic aircraft flights or centrifuge rides or altitude chamber or classroom training and simulators. All those kinds of things have an opportunity to be of interest to the general public and to better prepare those who actually do want to follow up with a flight to space. And also the report laid out ideas on what are some things that we can do as a country in terms of changing policy and law and regulations to streamline the process and make it easier for more and more companies and individuals to get involved.
Well, I'm going to change it up a little bit, and we're going to go with the marketing point of view from the next question. I heard you speak at events such as the Global Spaceport Summit at Spacecom, and I know marketing and communications is something that you believe is very important. Spaceports need good communications with their stakeholders in order for the facilities to get off the ground, quote unquote, and make it successful. What are some successful communication examples that you have seen within the spaceport industry?
So, great question. Let me start by reminding folks that no two spaceports are alike, and there's no reason they should be. And so each of them is thinking about looking at what do we want to be? What do we want to offer? What kinds of systems do we want to host? What kinds of activities do we want to have take place here? And so thinking back over some of the examples that I've seen and learned about over the years, let me just share a couple that I think relate to your question. First of all, Spaceport America. When that was first being approved and developed, I used to really enjoy listening to the New Mexico governor, Governor Richardson, when he was talking about the spaceport to his citizens. And he would often, in his speeches, ask folks, what do you think the biggest export is from New Mexico? And people would scratch their brains and try to figure out what he was getting at and what the answer to that question might be. And after a pause, he would say, it's our children, because they're growing up and they don't see any job opportunities and they leave. And so one of his primary drivers for encouraging the development of this gateway to space in New Mexico was to have something that would be motivating and interesting and exciting for students and teachers, and then opportunity for jobs and wonderful experiences right there in the state. And again, it's taking longer than some people hoped for at the time, but we're seeing that potential come to fruition now, and other locations may have a similar vision for what they're trying to accomplish. A separate example, I like to look at Houston. There's actually a spaceport with an FAA license in Houston. And that sounds crazy, because how can you have a big rocket taking off from a busy airport in a major city like Houston? And the answer is that they're not focusing on having big rockets take off today from their local facilities at Ellington. Instead, they're looking back and they're recognizing they have a wonderful, amazing history in space with the Johnson Space Center and the Apollo moon program and all the rest, but they can't rest on their laurels. They need to think about the future. And what is that future going to look like? They've looked very strategically and are thinking, we in Houston want to be part of an intermodal transportation system that is focusing on long distance, high speed transportation, like point to point transportation through space. And so they're starting now building the partnerships with the government, like NASA and the FAA, like academia, with Rice University, University of Houston, and others, and with industry, companies like Axiom, that just had that private astronaut launch to the space station recently as their headquarters right there in Houston at the spaceport. And they're trying to bring all the right people together so that when there is a vehicle, when the technology allows us to go from one side of the world to the other in an hour, Houston can be a place where that happens. And so it's a really very impressive way of thinking about the future, and not just focusing on what can I do today, and if I can't have something now, we're not going to play.
There's all kinds of different launch opportunities that are coming online too. I mean, everything from gliders to balloons to horizontal takeoffs. So, like you said before, each spaceport is a little different, and their challenges are going to be a little bit different, and their services are going to be a little bit different. What are some of the things about in regards to marketing and communications do you think that the industry is struggling with?
Another great question. Frankly, I think some folks probably have unrealistic expectations. They've heard about the space activities and they think it sounds fun and interesting. And so they, I guess, think that if they just hang a shingle out in the front of the door or say, well, we have our license now, that people will come knocking on the door and all of a sudden there'll be plenty of jobs and plenty of money flowing in. And of course, that's not the way it works. There's a lot of thought, a lot of energy, a lot of commitment that has to go into this whole process. And so you need to do your homework if this is something that is of interest to your local community. Also, there are things much bigger than the FAA and the launch license or launch site license process that are part of the law, including the environmental review process, environmental impact statements, and all those kinds of things. That can take a while and it can be expensive to go through the process. And that's not intended to be a go, no go for some of these ideas. It's intended to gather all the relevant information so that senior decision makers will have all the information they need to make those decisions, like the granting spaceport licenses in the future. So that's certainly something that needs to be considered. And then, frankly, just education and communication with the local population is so important so that they can understand, what does this look like? What is this all about? What are the impacts? What are the pros and cons? Is this something we as a community want to get involved in? And that can make a huge difference in terms of local support for this kind of initiative.
And local support is key. It can make or break. And even if you are able to get past that, it's still going to be costly in time and money. I know that where I reside, just getting a general aviation airport set up and to be able to take flights, I mean, we're looking at a 16-year, 17-year process. This is a long game view. It is something that you have to start, and it's not something that's going to be built by next year. I know the FAA is trying to streamline a lot of the things to get these online quicker because there's a need. And can you talk a little bit about some of the needs for a spaceport?
Well, again, I think we would all benefit from having a lot more of them. Some people seem to think, oh, well, if you look at how many launches that take place, we can just do those at the existing spaceports. But there's more than 19,000 airports in this country. And just saying, well, why don't you fly out of LAX or Dulles? Well, if that's not where you're going, then that's not going to meet the need. And similarly, I think for spaceports, depending on what your mission is, what you're trying to do, then it can make sense to have different kinds of facilities in different locations all over.
Currently, the facilities that we have, if we have something really bad happen, as you know, like with a hurricane on the eastern shoreboard, it could wipe out quite a few of them. At the Space Transportation Conference this spring, they mentioned that there was 107,000 satellites that were scheduled to go up this year. We just don't have that many rocket launches as of right now. So I think the need is there, but it is a long game. It is not something that can be turned around in a short period of time.
Very true.
So what advice would you offer somebody that is trying to bring a spaceport to their state, area, country? Because this is a global thought. You know, we have lots of spaceports popping all over the world. I know one gentleman that we're going to have as a speaker. He's getting one set up in Ecuador. So what would be some of your advice for people that are trying to get the spaceports to the area?
So I'd say you don't have to start from scratch, and you don't have to go it alone. So you should take advantage of groups like the Global Spaceport Alliance and others who have gained the knowledge and the experience and lessons learned from other places and other times in order to streamline the process that you can go through. And then I recommend that you think about what unique advantages your community can bring to the table, whether it's the weather, a large, sparsely populated area of land or water that's nearby, close by academic institutions that you might be able to partner with, a highly educated or a well-trained workforce, that's certainly a big plus, existing aerospace facilities, either government or industry, or just a population that seems to be forward-looking and entrepreneurial in their philosophy. All of those things could be big advantages that you want to build on and take advantage of as you go forward in this process.
Definitely keep the conversation going with your stakeholders.
For sure.
One of the stakeholders is FAA. There's a lot of movement happening with FAA. Is there some news that you can let us know what it is? What are some of the things that are happening within the FAA and regards to spaceports itself?
So certainly a lot of activity. There have been some changes in personnel. The most recent Associate Administrator, Wayne Monteith, retired recently. And so Kelvin Coleman, who has been the deputy, is now acting Associate Administrator, and they're in the process of finding a permanent head for the office there. Recently, Congress directed the Department of Transportation and by delegation, the FAA, to set up an office of spaceports, which they've never really had before. They had an office of airports, but none of spaceports. And so now Pam Underwood has been designated as the director of that office. And so that's going to be a big help, I think. If you look at their workload now, there's been a tremendous growth in the number of launches. And I think it's going to be important that we look at what kinds of resources do they need in terms of staffing and funding from Congress in order that that not become an obstacle to the people that are applying for licenses and so forth. But, you know, as I look at things, I think we're really getting past a tipping point. We're really transitioning now to where commercial space is a much more mature and important activity. And so I think an appropriate question to begin talking about is it time for commercial space to be treated as a separate mode of transportation? And some people might have different opinions on that, but if you think that, well, it's important, but we can handle that within the Federal Aviation Administration, I think there will always be a tendency to try and apply the rules, the regulations, the philosophies, the culture, the lessons learned from aviation to space. And sometimes that'll work, sometimes that may not work. We've got different environment, we've got different law, we've got different regulations, we've got different kinds of vehicles, different risks, different costs, different benefits. So maybe now that we're seeing all this activity, it's time to consider either moving that office or starting a completely new office right at the office of the Department of Transportation. I think that could be an interesting change that could supercharge the activity that we're seeing these days.
And there is a ton of things that are happening. I mean, just within the next 4 years, it's mind-blowing what we're going to see. With space stations and the launches, the commercialization just in lower Earth orbit and going to the moon. What do you see as the spaceport industry? What does it look like to you in the next, say, 20 years?
Well, I see more spaceports, I see more launches, I see more partnerships, I see more collaboration, I see more opportunities for people to be engaged in space-related activities. It's just going to be so exciting.
It's a wonderful time to be in the industry for sure. So is there anything else that you would like to leave our audience with today?
Well, I think we've done a good job of talking about all the things that are going on and the challenges and the opportunities. It's a great place to be, like you mentioned. And if there are those who have questions or want to become more engaged, certainly reach out to me personally or to the the Global Spaceport Alliance, and we'd love to have you as part of the team. Feel free to just Google Global Spaceport Alliance, and they have a website there with contact information. If you have personal questions or discussions that you'd like to have, you can find me on LinkedIn. So look forward to those discussions.
Wonderful. And there's a lot of podcasts that end with, if you could go to space, would you? But I'm not going to ask you that question because you just went there. So congratulations again on that flight. And thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Please subscribe before you click to watch the bonus footage, such as Dr. Nield's Blue Origin flight to space. Links to my social media channels can be found on spacemarketingpodcast.com. A special thank you to Dr. Nield for joining us today and sharing his Blue Origin experience. Be sure to check out Global Spaceport Alliance on their website listed in the show notes today. Join us next week as we speak with Robert Ion as he brings space to Ecuador. And a sincere thank you to all of my listeners. I hope that you find this podcast useful for your journey as you reach for the stars.